Hello. I've decided on just a completely random off-the-cuff idea to review a black metal album. Hello. My name's Evan Bennett, an American composer, and today I bring you a review of a death metal album. Is this an April Fool's joke? I don't know. It's going to be up to you to decide. Today I'm going to be reviewing the album Idol by the American black metal band Horrendous. It came out in 2018. And this is an unscripted review. It's mostly just going to be my thoughts on each track as I listen to them. I've heard this album multiple times, but I'm going to be listening to each track one additional time between individual reviews so that I don't end up misremembering which parts come from which songs. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The opening track, Prescience, starts with a bass line that many might describe as being very ominous. I'll play it for you here on this piano so you can get a sense of the tone of this song. So, what is that bass line consisting of? What you have is a bass line that's built on G sharp minor. It's in the Phrygian mode, meaning that it's minor but with a lowered second degree. So you could also think of it as a G sharp scale built in the key of C sharp minor with 3 sharps. What's weird though is that not all the notes fit into this mode. If you listen carefully, you'll notice that the highest note is actually a major third, which actually implies that this scale might be built on instead the whole tone scale. So that would consist of a alternating minor and major second intervals. So it's kind of an odd bass line, but it works really nicely. Shortly after you hear this bass line repeat itself a few times with this kind of really low-voiced string chord accompanying it, it's followed then by this really interesting chord switch. Let me try that again. Well, isn't that strange? So, what's outlined is G sharp minor. I would call it G sharp minor, even though there's that major third in there, because everything around it implies that it's minor. After that, you get 2 odd chords, D minor, a tritone away. Then, well, this next chord, you could almost call it D major 7 inverted. Might be kind of hard to hear. It's a really weird chord. It also could be thought of as an F sharp minor chord with a lowered 6th, kind of an odd thing. People don't usually call minor chords with flat 6s very often. But you end up with this progression. I think it's really interesting, actually. It's this opening track is kind of what got me into the album. After this, there's a bit more of that G sharp minor lick, and then finally we get this fast section which uses a lot of really odd harmonies. It's not quite built on a D diminished scale, but it's really close. The notes would be D, E flat, F, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp. So it's almost like diminished mixed with melodic minor. So here's here's generally how that lick goes. I covered this on a bass. I'll be uploading it here at some point. It's really fun to play. So let's talk a little about what's going on in this really odd harmony. I'll include an image of what the actual notes are there too. If I can get this stupid software I have to work, I'll actually have an overlay to this. So we end up with this bass line, the very first couple notes. That implies mostly Phrygian, but with a raised 11th. Kind of an odd combination of notes. But then it's broken later, because you end up with those notes too, which maybe adds a slight majorish quality to the overall harmony. But I don't know, I almost don't think of this F sharp as an F sharp. I almost think of it as a G flat instead. It's not quite supposed to be thought of as a major tone, but instead as a diminished fourth lowering down to the minor third. So in some contexts, those kinds of notes can actually sound pretty dark. Like for instance, if I have a harmony, it's like it's really shocking sounding. It has a minor ninth interval in there. So when I hear that bass line, I hear ideas like that. But anyway, there's this generally D minor chord that moves down to B minor. As you'll find with the rest of this album, these kinds of chromatic mediant relationships are extremely common. You'll hear things like that. You might hear a move up the major third, like D minor to F sharp minor, or even down a minor third. Just depends on the track. Heck, it depends on which part of the track too. It's all over the place. So that's most of that song. You just hear that, and then you go back to that, and then it finally ends with a finger tap on that. It's a G sharp and an A, which again implies a sense of Phrygianness to the song. So I can't really talk about the lyrics or anything because it's just an instrumental track to open up. So let's move on to the next track. Soothsayer is actually one of my favorite tracks on the album. It is very dense with a lot of different types of material in it, a lot of really interesting harmonic ideas, and generally I also like the lyrics quite a bit. I'm not a poet myself, but when I used to write poetry in college, I always liked to err on the side of dark and mystical with references to cosmic things. Very Lovecraftian. I'm a big Lovecraft fan, and I feel like there's a lot of Lovecraft's ideology drenched in the lyrics here. I'll start with that actually, and then I'll move into the different musical examples. So, for example, there's a point where he says, let's see here. Trading skin, I'll thrive within your inner landscapes of despair. Malicious gaze to veil, satiate to shield you from fear. There's an implication of this type of entity that is coming off like it's good for mankind, or it's good for the individual. It's going to save us all from some kind of horrible, fearful thing that's going to be plaguing mankind sometime in the future. But the problem is that later on it talks about being actually a big problem for mankind. But you don't know me, your gods bow to me, and the road to salvation is paved with your bones. No spirit animates your soul, but the one that I create, dictate, disseminate, pervasive and uncontrolled. Yeah, doesn't paint a very happy picture there for sure, but it's really uplifted. The idea of the lyrics are uplifted really well by the music. The music itself is, I'm gonna move this real quick. The music itself is very chaotic. It can be hard to follow if you don't have a roadmap because it's constantly shifting around in time signatures and in ideas. There are, when I was going through it here, I count about 5 primary riffs in this song, and all of them are played usually twice. There's a couple of them that are only once, but they are done for long enough in the song, 30 seconds to a minute, that I felt it was warranted to include them. There were also plenty of other side riffs and fills, but I didn't include those just for the sake of time. If I get bored, which with this quarantine situation, I tend to get bored quite a bit, I might do something with this song more, arrange it. Well, not arrange it, but I might transcribe it or something so that you guys can follow along a bit more closely. But let's talk about some of these riffs in here. And again, I'll have these as an overlay if possible. And by the way, if I can't get an overlay working, I'll put images in the comment section or something so you can follow too. So we've got this very first riff. It's used at the very beginning when he's saying Soothsayer, so I kind of call it the Soothsayer riff. It starts in 3/4. Then it has a 2/4 hit in it, and it goes back into 3/4. Then there's this weird 5/4 thing that starts in the 6th chord, and then it moves down to the flat 5. So there's this kind of demented little chord progression that's implied in there. The whole riff sounds like this. So yeah, follow along, kids. Maybe you can learn to play this at home. The second riff's quite a bit harder. It's the tempo is slower, but it's all in 1/8 notes now, so the whole riff is quite a bit faster. I can't play it quite at tempo on the piano. It's something like that. There's it outlines D minor, and then you hear F diminished. So besides this, besides these diminished harmonies, things like that you hear in the song, as well as Phrygian, you also hear a lot of diminished harmony, either with just tritones moving, or you just hear chords moving around like that. And in fact, the very next riff that you hear is wholly built on this diminished harmony. Goes. I'm sorry, let me do that one more time. So yeah, you can hear it's like I said earlier, very demented. It's very jarring and confusing. When I was first hearing this song, it sounded like pure chaos. I had no idea what was going on, but it kind of added to the thrill of it at the same time. I usually am my mind is usually really quick to analyze everything it hears. Pop music I listen to, I already know what all the harmonies are just listening to the first time. And it makes it kind of boring. But when you have a song like this that's it's so convoluted with its structure, you know, it makes it really interesting for a person like me to follow along with. Later you have this 5/4 riff. It's actually done in tremolo, but I don't want to do that on a piano. What's weird though is that the backing guitar, like the drum part, is actually in 4. So It ends up breaking apart as time goes along. And that riff is done while the guitar is soloing. I did not transcribe the guitar solo. Again, that would take way too long. The last real riff that you hear in the song before it gets back to the beginning is... again, that's in 3/4, so it's felt like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. Like that. Then it returns to the Soothsayer riff at the very beginning, and then the song kind of just breaks up and it's done. I really enjoy this track. It's very exciting. It's difficult. And again, it's something that I feel like I'm probably going to try and cover at some point or transcribe just for my chops, because there's a lot of stuff in it. Moving on. In the third track, we get a bit more context for this evil little creature. Turns out there's actually some reason to believe it's Satan himself that is being worshipped here, or is being brought forth as a sort of evil savior of mankind, the destroyer of mankind at the same time. There's a point in it where he mentions that I am the ancient serpent, spawn of the morning star. I bring endless torture and despair, the wrath of Gehenna, and now you know my name and speak the tongues of pain, and your fettered limbs will know eternity. Whew. Yeah, not very light stuff. Not Sunday morning brunch music for sure. But Gehenna was a place in Jerusalem, where it was an ancient city where apparently kings sacrificed children as offerings, and it was deemed to be a cursed land after that. Pretty creepy stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here just talking about this evil being, Satan, whatever he might be, Lovecraftian monster. I kind of like to think of it more like a Lovecraftian monster, just based on some of the other lyrics. There are people who are coming to worship this thing, and it's not looking good for mankind. So, again, I'll move this over. So moving on then, let's talk a little bit about the music, because that's what we're all here for. This song uses some cross relations. A cross relation, I played a little bit of one earlier, is where you have a harmony that is mixed on whether it's major or minor, depending on the voicing. So if I play this, it's an E minor chord, but if I play a G sharp on top, is it a minor or a major chord? Who knows? It's kind of both at the same time. Cross relations are also a melodic thing. It's common to see them in places like... well, let's see if I can think of an example. That's a really common one from Baroque music. Right there. So, yeah, there's at the beginning of the song you have a D pedal that's going this whole time, and there's a clean guitar part that's going. Then you hear that chord in there, so it goes really interesting chord progression. You get the Neapolitan chord, the E flat major, and it goes back to D minor, and then I think it's D flat. There's really not enough notes there, but you hear a D flat in the bass. It could be augmented, it could be B flat minor. Who really knows? those, except for the band. So it does that, and then it goes back. This top part actually references the first main riff that you hear at the beginning. It picks up speed quite a bit. 2, 3. I'll play with one hand. Something like that. So there's a implication of there being a major 2 chord, kind of going back and forth between those. So you hear plenty of that kind of stuff. Later on, you start hearing more references to C minor, actually. It slows down slightly. Yeah, so when you hear that, you hear that. And it later solidifies this C minorness when there's this kind of scream section where there's the whole band blasting away with this really nice chord progression, A flat to C minor. Before you hear that, though, there is a point where you hear just this played on the fretless bass of all things. I'm not sure what kind of horrible thing that the bass player said to the band that made them decide to punish him this way, but there are some really punishing bass lines in this song. But yeah, after that really quick diminished, it goes back to that. You hear that progression for a little while. Then yeah, it goes back to this. I keep playing it wrong. This is on a fretless bass. It's ouch. My hand hurts just thinking about playing that on a bass. But it's really quick, very tight, just excellent playing. He does an amazing job with it. After this, it just returns back to the returns to that really aggressive lick at the beginning. I guess you can call it the idolater lick. And that's most of the song, actually. It's not quite as dense thematically as the first song is. Alright, anyway, moving on. Okay, for the sake of brevity, the fact that I'm getting kind of bored of doing this, and I'm running out of ideas, I'm just going to skip to my favorite track now. The last track, Obelisk. So, starting with the lyrics, as we've been doing, it's kind of hard to describe what the lyrics are about here at the beginning. It's almost like a person is maybe recognizing the wrong that they had done by worshiping this being. I'm not sure. It's hard to say. You dig my grave, you run me through. Show me my demons, my angels, my muse. The frayed ends of a dream, tied in a noose. Show me my saviors, my specters, my devils, my dues. Maybe a little edgy, but I think it works pretty well with the music, which we'll get into just in a minute here. The music for Obelisk is my favorite in the whole album. It's very, very heavy. There's a lot of very interesting riffs that are in it. And the reason why there keeps being cuts is also because I'll take the time to actually figure out what's going on in the song so I can talk about it a bit more clearly. I'll be more organized in the future if I decide to do that. So, another nice thing about this song is there seems to be some kind of imitating a choral vocals of a guy. He's not screaming like the other guy is, but he's singing. Oop. Sorry, my piano turned off. He's singing, "At the rainbow's end, what use are promises of Eden to begin anew when hope is just another poisoned fruit?" And you're like this, Something like that. It's very sad. It's got the same chord progression as Chopin's famous funeral march. And you actually hear that progression earlier in the album too. It's a good, heavy but dramatic chord progression that's not really weird and outside like some other ones are. So yeah, there's just a lot more reference. There's some references to ancient Greek. Things like dry your eyes, Sisyphus, and shoulder your burden, and in the end they'll measure your worth by how much you've been broken and give you the stone to roll again. That's pretty good. I like that. So yeah, I'll be done with the lyrics here. I think the lyrics are really great in this album. They really pull the melody into the general feel of the music so well. They don't feel like just boilerplate, edgy teenager wrote in his basement lyrics like some other death metal albums I've heard. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of care was put into crafting these lyrics to make them interesting and to make them as evocative as the music itself is. Let's get into the music now. There's a lot of stuff going on. I have 8 different riffs in here that are primary. There's some other random things that you hear all over the place. In some sections, I didn't bother with transcribing mostly because it's not riff-based per se. It's mostly just a chord progression, like in the chorus. So at the beginning, we have this... yeah, that kind of a thing. The second time it actually goes... and that's, again, played by the bass. Bass player's a god. It's insane. At least for me on my 4-string, doing... requires an insane amount of reaching and moving. He does an amazing job in this. So you hear this kind of really... I almost want to say orchestral kind of a sound at the beginning. It's balancing a lot of different sounds. There's harmonies that are mixed in with the riffs, and everything just has this really aggressive tone to it. So you get to this chorus where, as I played earlier, that part right there, and they go back and forth between those two chords for a while, and then eventually you get back to that thing too. So you see mostly that kind of stuff at the beginning. Nothing too far different from that. But later on, we hear a new riff, which goes. Something like that. So it goes. Let me try it again, sorry. So, interesting harmonies there. It's actually going to be an outline for a later chord progression that we're going to hear. A really great, amazing ending that's just outrageous. But you hear this... that's the general harmony that I hear in there. It's just D minor and E flat, nothing too crazy. And then when you hear a... something like that, so you hear a... basically, I would hear it as... something like that. And you hear that for a while. A thrash beat comes in with the drum set. I love it. Well, probably one of the highlights of the whole album is that moment. It goes back to the chorus. He sings different words there. And then kind of as a reference to the last track that I covered, where there was that really crazy bass line. You hear something kind of similar in the later you hear it like this. You can tell I need to practice piano more. Something like that. Really fast. It's moving really, really quickly there. And that riff is pretty pervasive. You hear it quite a bit in this song. There's another return to the chorus section, this time for a guitar solo, a really great one. And then finally, the outro music comes into play. Really weird stuff going on in here. Very chromatic. You're going to hear this. I was wrong, sorry. Yeah. Those are the first notes. D, E flat, A, G sharp. So basically it's outlining a tritone sub. Here the tritone's like shoved into a D power chord, which gives it a it actually reminds me a little bit of Slonimsky's thesaurus of melodic patterns. It's got that kind of, I could picture that being in that book. Something like that. But later you hear that same riff, but there's an extra beat added into it. So it's... So then you have that same thing, D, E flat, A, G sharp. Then you hear an E natural, F, C, C sharp, D. Yeah, and that is the like last three and a half minutes of the song are using that as like a backing feel, but then it's changed slightly. So what you do then is instead of that low, just that one chord, now you hear it as. Constantly, just running. It's very energetic for sure, and it's, I don't know, it's just I love that riff. It's so it really works really well for me, basically, and it starts kind of breaking apart and fracturing after that, and then finally you see a return to that slower feel. But this time, it's a new new filler. Whenever you hear the D minor chord, you hear A, F, A flat, E flat, and then it stays the E flat again. Then E flat minor, and then it's kind of a reference to some common things in Norwegian black metal where you have just direct linear progressions like that, D minor, E flat minor. So yeah, that section goes. That just running for the whole rest of the song. It's very very epic sounding, for lack of a better word. I don't mean epic like epic, but more like it's very grand and expansive, and kind of scary sounding. Actually, you hear the operatic vocals come in, but they're more haunted this time. There's they're not singing any words. It's just holding a pitch and then dropping. So you hear the first note they sing is an F. Dropping, and then the second time we go back to that chromatic median thing, like I mentioned at the beginning, where you have that chord. Now you hear something like that with this song too, with an F sharp song, and then it starts dropping again. I kind of wish they'd hung on to it a little bit longer, because ooh, that chord is so so dark. I love it. It's one of my favorite chords when you have a minor chord with a major third on top. Very unusual. And the very last thing you hear on the track is this guitar poking out of the texture. And it does that 3 or 4 times, and yeah, probably one of the more interesting things I've heard in any metal album ever. It actually, to me, sounds like a reference to Weakling, Dead as Dreams. The last track on the album, Disasters in the Sun, spelled with a D, Disasters. There's a kind of a similar thing that the guitar does. It's something like... these big stacked fifths and fourths combined with each other, so you end up with this really weird harmony, and there's a lot of reverb and distortion, so it kind of just all floats on this wave of distortion, and you hear multiple guitars doing that. Yeah, I'm not sure if it actually is a reference to Weakling, but it reminds me of it at least. I think that's about it for this. Kind of rambling, a little bit long. Hopefully you guys don't think it's the worst thing you've ever heard. Feel free to give me a downvote if you didn't like it. I don't care. It just tells me that maybe not do that in the future if it's something that I don't care about. If I still like to do this, I'll do it anyway. But regardless, that's my review of Idol by Horrendous. Really fantastic album. Go listen to it. All right. Have a nice day.